Doing this will stop you improving, or at the very least, severely slow down your process of improvement, which none of us obviously want, but it's such an easy trap to fall into, and particularly if we're a self-taught artist, I think this dynamic can easily start, which really holds us back in our development of our drawing skills. And it's not our fault, it's not anyone's fault. So in the next few minutes, I want to explain 3 things. What the problem is, why I think it is such a problem in the improvement of our drawing, and how, particularly as a self-taught artist, we can navigate our way around the problem. And in some ways, try and have the best of all worlds as much as it is possible. So what's this problem? It's really simple. In our enthusiasm to learn to draw, and in our enthusiasm for the subjects that we draw, and in our enthusiasm to get to a high level of achievement in our drawings, we draw subjects which are simply too complex for us, simply too difficult for us. We draw the subjects that we see in the artworks that we're attracted to, in the artworks that possibly even inspired us to want to draw in the first place. In other words, we're seeing all the time the end place where we want to end up with our drawing in terms of subject and skill level. And so it's a natural assumption that what I need to do is to practice drawing these subjects. And I recognize that I won't do as well at the start as I will later, but I might even think the only way to be able to draw these subjects, such as the Musée du Louvre, is to start by drawing them possibly not so well, but to learn to improve in my drawing of them. And there's certainly a lot of logic in that. But the problem is, this is simply not a good way to learn. And if we think for a moment about almost any other area of creative skill development, we can see it more clearly somehow than in drawing. If I wanted to learn the violin, I would never think that starting with pieces by Vivaldi was going to be a helpful starting point. That if I just kept trying to play these very complex violin pieces over and over again, I would eventually get better at playing them. Or with singing, that if I loved singing and wanted to learn to sing, I would never think that by starting with a very complex, difficult song, with very demanding voice requirements, that would be a helpful place to start. No, in all of these things, we would say, look, we need to start at a simpler level. We need to get on top of the fundamental skills. With singing, I need to learn scales. I need to learn to hit the easiest notes in my register accurately every time without any thinking, and then learn to push to those notes that are on the outer limits of my register. I need to learn to breathe properly so that I can produce my voice to its optimum level and not hurt my vocal cords. And particularly with the violin, I will learn how to do simple things like to hold the bow properly and to do nice, long, even strokes with the bow to produce nice, even notes. And then bit by bit, I will learn to produce shorter, sharper notes. I'll start with the notes where it's easiest to get the finger positions correct. I'll start with the transitions where the changing of the fingers from one position to another isn't too complicated. And as I become comfortable at doing these things well, I will keep pushing myself into more demanding, more complex, more difficult aspects of voice or violin. Because this is how we learn to learn anything. It's how children learn to talk and walk, and it's how we learn to draw. And if we're wanting to learn to draw, it's the most straightforward, effective and efficient way that we're going to do this. And if I'm doing the course or I have a teacher in anything, then presumably the course has been organized, the teacher organizes the lessons so that we have this helpful progression from more basic skills to more complex skills. But if I'm self-taught, I may not understand the learning process well enough, and I may get swept up in my enthusiasm for wanting to be able to draw really well, for being inspired by really grand, complex drawings, and for my love of the subjects that I want to draw, that I want to spend time looking at while I draw. And for all these reasons, it's very easy to start at the end, or maybe not the end, but maybe halfway along. And so I haven't yet developed the skills I need to do that well. And if I consistently draw the same sorts of subjects or the same sorts of scenes over and over again with only a moderate level of accuracy or skill, then I can very quickly get used to seeing my drawing as representing the scene. I start to lose the ability to think, oh, there are problems with this. This isn't quite right. Because I've been drawing too many things not quite right for too long. And now I don't see the issues in them. To me, they look right. And as a self-taught artist, it's really important that I develop the ability and maintain the ability to see the things in my drawings that aren't quite right, because they're the things I have to work on. It's why I often talk of the importance of critiquing our works when we finish them, asking what hasn't quite turned out, looking at our reference, not just looking at our drawing, but looking at our reference and trying to see where I can set myself some direction for my next drawing. But when I start with subjects consistently that are too hard for the level of my skill development, I can get so used to seeing what I do that I lose the objectivity to see the things that aren't right. It's a bit like when a singer hasn't learnt to discern exactly what all the notes sound like before they start to sing, and they consistently hit some notes slightly wrong, but they've been singing them so wrong for so long to themselves that they don't sound wrong to their ear anymore, but they do sound not quite right to other people listening. And this same problem happens with our drawing. If you've made it to this third point, then why not hit subscribe, but also notifications, so that when I post a new video, you can check straight away whether it's something that's relevant to your art journey. So what can I do to avoid this error? How can I develop my drawing skills and improvement in a helpful way? Well, the first, perhaps most obvious area is in our subject choice. Whatever we like to draw, whether it's buildings or horses or portraits, we should resist the urge, at least most of the time, to go to the references that probably excite us the most, but which would overwhelm our ability to do well at that point. And choose some simpler subjects. My son was learning to juggle once, and he didn't start with a whole handful of balls, astounding us all with keeping them in the air. He started with one that he threw up and down, up and down, up and down. And then he changed hands and just threw the one up and down, up and down. And then he was still just with the one ball, but he was throwing it up and catching it with the other hand. And then at some point, he progressed to having two balls in the air at the same time. Now, I'm not sure whether he actually progressed to three balls or not, but the point was he didn't start at the end product. He started doing something very simple, developing the skills that he would need. So before we start drawing the Musée du Louvre, we're better off drawing a simple cottage and having to juggle, say, perspective with a very simple form and learn to get it really precisely correct. And then possibly a more complex building where we have to apply perspective to more elements and be confident that we're getting them right before we move on to something else more complex. But it's not just perspective, it's being able to draw effectively the decorations, things such as ornamental sculptures. Again, there's no point drawing the Musée du Louvre with the many statues and caryatids on the facade and in the pediment if we haven't developed the technique to draw one figure as an architectural sculpture in a credible way, because we will need further skill to do a whole lot together in a way that doesn't stand out as somehow less well done than the rest of the building. It's probably not helpful to draw scenes with large trees which often accompany grand architecture if we haven't learnt how to draw foliage well, if we haven't learnt how to do a simple tree in a way that looks in some way realistic to the degree that we need it to be for our own drawing style. Because we don't want to do buildings where the trees around the buildings look awkward. The second thing we can do to avoid the errors of choosing subjects that are beyond our ability is to ask a friend to critique our work. They don't have to be an artist. They don't have to be able to draw better than we can. What we want them to do is to look at our drawings and to answer the question, does anything not look quite right? Or does anything look clumsy? Does anything look as if it's somehow drawn less well than other parts of the drawing, because it can be difficult when we've drawn a whole scene and we've got used to it line by line to have the objectivity to now stand back and see things that don't work, because in our mind that was working for us, at least at the time we were drawing it, and we've now got used to seeing it. So to show it to a fresh set of eyes can be a great way to discover if anything doesn't look quite right. And if we consistently are being told that the same sorts of things don't look quite right, then quite possibly that's a really strong indication that we need to pull back a little bit in our subject choices to find something a bit less demanding so that we can get better in our skill level with a simpler subject. And then from that stronger foundation, move back on to some of the elements that we can't quite pull together all at the same time at the moment. But we should still also critique our drawing ourselves. And I think particularly if we draw architecture, we need to check our perspective angles very closely with our reference. Have we managed to increase each angle at least slightly? Or have we fallen into the trap of drawing parallel lines when we shouldn't have? So we also need to still look at our drawing with a fresh set of eyes ourselves, and that can be easily done by holding our drawing up to a mirror, and that flipping can just be enough to let us see things that aren't quite right, or coming and looking at it the next morning when we've slept away from it. I find that can be a confronting moment when suddenly I can see something now that I've got used to not seeing it, and I can see it more clearly. The next point is always set aside time to do exercises, not artworks. Again, think of a musical instrument. A lot of the practice time, if not most of it, early on, is spent doing exercises, not artworks. It's mastering the various components that will then be brought together for, at first, a relatively simple piece. But if we're drawing, we need to do the equivalent of scales and so forth. We need to do line exercises. If I want to be able to draw a straight line freehand in ink, then I need to practice doing that when I'm not doing a drawing. And if I practice it when I'm not doing a drawing, I can do dozens and dozens of practices in just a few minutes. And I have videos on that, and really on all of these individual components if you want to work on any particular skills. Sketching is another skill that it's good to practice with relatively simple shapes on a relatively small scale, which gives us freedom in experimenting and trying different things, because we don't have a wonderful line work drawing that we're afraid to spoil. Or we might want to develop exercise that concentrate on certain parts of the subjects that we like to draw. So foliage. How do I draw leaves when I can't draw every leaf? How do I draw the bricks in a wall when I can't or I don't want to draw every brick? How do I draw branches of a tree if it's winter? If we can see at least some of the time that I'm doing exercises to develop skills, then that also reminds me that this is a learning process, and that takes a lot of pressure off me. Another helpful thing is to do research. And by that, I mean get information outside of myself. And that can obviously include videos such as this one, videos on various exercises to develop line work or whatever. But also, I think importantly, looking at the drawings of other artists, looking at the drawings of subjects that we like to draw ourselves and saying, how has this artist captured the sense of bricks in the wall, or of leaves on the tree, or of cobblestones on the street? How have they created a sense of depth? If we look at the sorts of issues that we know we have to deal with in our drawings, particularly those ones that we don't think maybe we're doing very well at, and looking to see how other artists have more successfully handled them, then we can get ideas and thoughts of things we can try at first in our own exercises, but then in our more considered drawings as well. And this final point may sound a bit opposite to what I've been saying up till now, but that's at times to challenge ourselves, to push ourselves, to do something that is perhaps beyond our ability level, just for the interest and the excitement and for what it tells us. Where we sing the hard songs, where we play the hard pieces, where we draw the complex subjects. Maybe every 6 months I draw the Musée du Louvre simply because I love looking at it. It's such an amazing building. And every 6 months I might get out and compare my drawing with the one before. And hopefully that will be an encouraging process. but I haven't spent the 6 months in between trying to draw buildings at that level of complexity. It is certainly my understanding and experience if we start with subjects that are easier, have less complexity, that we can do well because they challenge us in less ways at that point. And then bit by bit, we move on to subjects that challenge us more. And if we can get some feedback, and if we can realize that learning is a process and we don't start by drawing artworks, and therefore we break down the skills that we can understand that we need to develop, and we work on those not to produce artworks, but as skill development. If we do all these things, we will position ourselves for far greater improvement. I really hope you found this encouraging. It's so easy, if we don't feel we're improving, to somehow blame that on our lack of talent, instead of blaming it on the fact that we just haven't understood the learning process as helpfully as we might have. But whatever you're doing, whether it's an exercise or a drawing, whatever you're drawing, make sure you have fun. I'm Travers. I'll see you next time. Bye.